Well, what an honor to be here today with the amazing, beautiful Stephanie Taylor from the Realty Path Ogden office.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, today we get to talk about an interesting subject that's been in the media
Yeah, a little bit.
a little bit. Yeah, there's a lot of agents who have questions, a lot of consumers that have questions, and that is the NAR lawsuit and its proposed settlement that started clear back in 2020, I believe, if I'm not mistaken,
Sounds
in Missouri. So we're going to jump in and talk about some of the myths and some of the facts and clear a few things up, shall we?
I like it. All
Okay,
right.
cool.
I'm going to ask you the first one.
Yes,
I think you're better suited for this.
take it away.
Myth number one, the proposed settlement covers only a fraction of members.
Okay, so that is a myth, and the fact is that it does cover most of all of the licensed agents out there, but it does cover all of NAR, many affiliates that are members of NAR, as well as all the MLS systems. They are included in this settlement, and through the process of this settlement will be cleared of any future liability. So now there is a caveat to that, and it was based on sales volume. And I'd be curious as to where they came up with this, but they decided to pick the 2022 year and look at the sales volume of any given company. And as long as the sales volume was under $2 billion, then you would be cleared. You would be included in the settlement, and you would not have to come to the table with any money to take care of this class action lawsuit. And I guess we should back up a little bit and tell our audience that we are talking about the NAR class action lawsuit.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
and I guess let's give a little bit of background on that too. Okay, so the class action lawsuit came about, to my understanding, based on two primary reasons. One was standardization of real estate commissions. So there was this argument that realtors were fixing commissions, that no matter what, you had to pay a 6% commission, 3% would go to the listing agent, 3% would go to the buyer's agent. And to me, that was a pretty ludicrous accusation, just because I think there's ample evidence that though some companies may require a standard fee, there were several companies, ours included, that did not. So, and I'll mention that here briefly as we went through our exercise to see if we were over or under that $2 billion requirement, so, or limit. Now, the second part, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and the great news is Realty Path did verify we are under, so
Yes.
we are protected.
Yeah, we are protected. I believe our sales volume was somewhere around like 1.7. So we were several hundreds of millions of dollars under, but close enough where it was like, ooh, you know.
Yeah.
So it's nice to know that we are not included with that class action lawsuit. But let's talk about the second reason. The second reason came about due to the fact that there were home sellers who were complaining that they had to pay a buyer's agent's commission without their knowledge. And in some states, that was the case. In the state of Missouri, where this all began, listing agents would get listing agreements, and then they would pay out a commission to a buyer's agent, but there was no disclosure except at the closing table that was occurring.
Yep.
So, and in the normal course of taking a listing, you get a exclusive right to sell agreement, you negotiate a buyer's agent's commission, you advertise that buyer's agent's commission on the MLS, and that way a buyer's agent will know how much they will be compensated when they bring a buyer to the table, when they bring a buyer to purchase a property. Now, we were smart in the state of Utah. At some point in time, we included with our listing agreements a breakdown of the buyer's agent's commission. So that argument really did not hold up in Utah.
Yeah.
And so we kind of feel unjustly dealt with here in the state of Utah. We feel like there's no way that lawsuit would have won here.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, we're very fortunate. We have from our local association executives at our highest our large associations, I should say, in our local markets, along with our state association, we have attorneys, and I think they see that writing far sooner than the rest of us, and they recognized what needed to happen
Yes.
much earlier. So for over 10 years, to my understanding, we've had very clear documentation about what's called cooperation through
Yeah.
compensation. So,
Yes, exactly. So back to your question, we wanted to do the exercise. We were required to go through the exercise of looking at our sales volume and seeing where we were at, and we were fortunately under that $2 billion amount in sales volume. If you were over, part of the settlement required you to come in with a certain amount of money. And fortunately, Realty Path does not have to do that, so we won't have that impact. But in that process, doing that exercise, we also discovered that over the last 4 years, our average compensation for any transaction side was right around 2.25%. And usually you think of the standard commission as being a 3% commission.
yeah,
So that is just evidence that our company alone does not have a standard commission, and agents are already feeling a certain amount of downward pressure to reduce their commission. And we see that quite often, especially during a transaction, we'll see an agent who they want to make the deal work. The seller's tight on cash and some issue arises, usually in the due diligence period, sometimes in the financing period, where both buyer and seller have to come to the table. Sometimes the listing agent and the selling agent have to come to the table and offer compensation to get the deal done. So, and I wouldn't be surprised if industry-wide it was way less than 3%. So that whole argument of the standardized commission, I just don't think holds up.
they actually did have a third party who looked into that, and from the data that they pulled, NAR shows that it's actually closer to 5% than it is 6%, and has been for years.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that makes sense. I mean, 2.25 and 2.25 is what, 4.5? So we're close to that 5, But anyway, it is a little odd to think that our industry would be, I'm going to say victim to a class action lawsuit.
Yeah.
Because usually when you think of class action lawsuits, you think of, some manufacturing company who's poisoned the water. They've put all their waste into some stream and now it's gone downstream and has affected all these homeowners. And, usually that's what a class action lawsuit is for, or some pharmaceutical company who has produced some drug that wasn't properly vetted and is now causing permanent damage to people. And those are class action lawsuits. So I think what scares me, and I'm sharing obviously my personal opinion, what does this open the door to? If today it's real estate, tomorrow is it insurance, car sales. I mean, take any industry where somebody feels like they're unjustly paid compensation that they didn't agree to. And I think that's the one part of this where NAR was hoping to appeal. And in the world of, in the legal world, coming to a settlement is usually what people do. So, but in the appeal process, seeing that there's now a settlement, you're probably not going to get to that stage of an appeal. But I just think, if this starts with real estate, how many more industries will be impacted? And that's a discussion for another day. But am I glad to see a settlement? Yes, I'm glad to see that it's been consolidated. So let's talk about that for a moment. The consolidation, I think, was important because it took all 50 states and
I agree.
And allowed a settlement to take place rather than multiple lawsuits in 50 different states going rampant. So
dragging
kind of
on forever.
Yes. Yeah. So it creates a quick resolve, but there's mixed feelings depending on who you talk to and those companies that are over that $2 billion amount, they're not happy because they're, according to the settlement, are now required to come to the table with cash to pay into that class action lawsuit. So there's mixed feelings across the board.
Yeah, and I can see that. I would agree, with NAR when they say that they're no worse off than they were before the agreement, because they were left open to far bigger liability. This at least helped kind of consolidate that and give them a place to know what that liability is, because it could have been far greater. But I can understand people having a difference of opinion. That's okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the reason why this conversation is important with Stephanie is because she was the president of the NWAR, right? The Northern Wasatch Association of Realtors, last year or the year before?
Year before.
The year before.
Yeah.
Okay. And what do they call it when you're the president just out? It's
immediate past president.
Immediate
and
past
now
president.
and now I'm done with that. And
so you now get to finally breathe. Right?
Yes. Yeah. Now vice president for UAR. So
how cool.
A little difference of time.
Yes.
But
your involvement both with UAR and NWAR makes you a perfect candidate to chime in and offer probably an opinion that your average agent may not be aware of. So
thanks. Yeah. Well, I hope I have something to offer. I mean, we'll see. We just want our agents to be informed and, make sure they have the best information possible to do their jobs. So.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So we kind of went over myth number 2, which was talking about the other brokerages. So I'm going to go ahead and skip to myth number 3. NAR requires a standard 6% commission.
Okay, so we touched on this, and yes, that's a myth. No, there is no requirement. And if you look at the lawsuit in particular in this aspect of it, what brought this about is that there were companies who did require a 6% commission. And I can share a personal experience. There's an agent, I won't name this agent by name, but she's a fantastic agent, and I've been trying to get her to come to our company because of the number of transactions she does. I think she gives the industry a good name. Yeah. So, but for years and years and years, she was reluctant to even consider a different brokerage. She told me, she said, "Do you protect my commission?" I remember having a phone call with her, and she said, "If I were to come to Realty Path, do you protect my commission?" That's how she phrased it. Interesting. And I said, "What do you mean by protect?" And she said, "Well, no matter what, my company requires that I charge a 6% commission." And I said, "Well, here's how I'll answer your question. As your broker, if someone's refusing to pay you, do I protect your commission? Yes. If you've done the work and you have a legal right to receive compensation, I'm going to go to bat for you. However, do we let you as the agent choose to charge what you want to charge? Yes, we do."
Yeah.
And that was enough for her to say, "No, I'm not interested." Because I really, she used it as a way to get compensation no matter what, And I'm sure she probably lost out on some business, because I think there are savvy sellers and buyers who want to be able to maybe save some money and want the ability to shop around and maybe find an agent who is willing to discount a commission,
Well, because commissions have always been negotiable, and NAR has never stepped in and said a standardization. And I think the only thing that they've ever said rule-wise is you have to be clear about what your compensation is. Yeah. Whatever you negotiated with your seller needs to be clear and put on the MLS.
Yes.
And so that's interesting that that's how she decided to phrase it, because ultimately it's her commission. So she should be able to be the one that fights for that.
Yeah.
I think what we'll see from this lawsuit is actually an increase in professionalism, where people have to become very clear about what it is that they provide, their service, their value. And I think what's great about that is that people will be able to explain their value up front, because one of the new things that is in the lawsuit, one of the requirements is that there will need to be a buyer broker agreement signed prior to showing a house. So people have to be clear about what it is that they do, what it is that they be compensated with before they walk through that home.
Yes.
How do you feel about that? What do you think is?
So that's probably one of the things that's given agents the most heartburn.
Yeah.
Traditionally, what agents have done, especially to build rapport with a prospective client, a prospective buyer client,
Okay.
is to go show them some properties. Let me show my expertise. Let's see if our personalities don't clash. That will no longer be the case. I mean, I feel like agents are going to try to do a much better job at selling themselves before they go show a property. And I've had some agents complain about this and say, well, I never get a buyer broker agreement signed until the time that I'm making an offer, which was the state requirement. That was the state of Utah law. So I think what's going to be interesting is if, with all the agents playing by the same rules, buyers are probably going to take a little bit more time to shop. Mm-hmm. One of the concerns is that this will cut out a buyer's agent. I've had some agents say, well, if buyer's agents are now requiring a buyer broker agreement up front, will they just go directly to the listing agent? And the answer is maybe. I think there will be some buyers who do that. But I think some buyers, as they're calling around to different agents, are probably just going to, do their homework. They're going to take more time to research. And I think if agents are cordial and they say, well, there's nothing wrong with meeting somebody in person still,
Right.
Where we could probably see some agents get in trouble is still offering to go show a property. And then, the moment they show up, they'll be like, well, I need you to sign this before I can show you. And then they'll probably tick off some agent or some buyer clients or prospective buyer clients. But, consultations, I think this is the thought that's come into my mind time and time again. And I've been recommending to agents, I'd do a consultation. Yeah. Just like the legal world, where attorneys are offering free consultations, offer a free consultation. Why don't you come meet with me? Let's go to a coffee shop. Let's get together. Let's chat. Let's see if our personalities jive. Yeah. And then you'd have an opportunity to get them to sign a buyer broker agreement,
Yeah, I like that.
So I think that consultation approach could be really good for buyer's agents to get a buyer broker agreement signed prior to showing. So now I have been asked, what is the penalty? And I'm not clear on this yet because I need to get some clarification probably from UAR, and because I don't know yet what the penalty would be for those agents. And there will be agents who will violate this, and what is the penalty? That we don't have answers for yet.
Well, I think once everything's settled and the judge has signed off, provided that everything goes as planned, I think that'll be something they have to figure out with the Division of Real Estate. Yeah. So I think that's kind of still in the works. Yeah. So we'll see how that.
You brought up a good point. The settlement is supposed to be signed off in July of this year.
Correct.
But it could be further out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but you're absolutely right. I'm sure the division will get involved. And if the division doesn't get involved, if they just strictly stick to licensure, then the penalty would have to come through the boards. And
Yep.
That'll be interesting.
Oh, well, it'll be really interesting.
Agents ratting out other agents, they showed this home without a buyer broker agreement. It'll be interesting to see how that resolves itself.
Yeah, it will. Yeah. I do love the idea of that buyer meeting. I do that with clients, and we walk through how the MLS works and why they might see homes that they probably wouldn't want on their list, and the limitations of bad data in, bad data out. So we go through all of that before we ever walk through a home, just like I would if I met with a seller and we talk about their home and the process. And then they're able to sign that contract if they feel good and move forward. And it protects both of us. And so I think we'll see more agents doing that. And I love that. I think that'll be great for our industry. So.
Yes, I think so too. So back to the question of agents having concern about buyers going directly to listing or listing agents, we can self-sabotage. This is what I've been telling agents. Yeah. And I think we will do ourselves a disservice if we're just trying to get all the business for ourselves, So this is a caution, I think, to listing agents to say, hey, there's a lot of power and power may be the wrong word, but when you talk about representation, you look at representation, the listing agents, they have the seller's best interests at heart, or should, and by allowing a buyer to come directly to them, there's already a conflict of interest there with the potential of limited agency.
Absolutely.
My caution to listing agents would be, if an unrepresented buyer comes along and complains, well, I came to you directly because, agents keep telling me they won't show the property unless I have a buyer broker agreement. I think it's okay to give some pushback, and they should give some pushback. Yeah. And, it will help our industry if we don't sabotage our industry. Listing agents, getting the back of the buyer's agents and vice versa. So how this plays out in practice, we'll see over the next couple months.
It'll be interesting. Yeah. I agree, though. I think that'll probably be the case to start out, and then we'll find a balance within our industry. We always do. Yeah. Practices have changed over the years, been around for a really long time. So, it'll be interesting. Do you have a question for me, or do you want me to continue to ask you questions?
Oh, shoot away. Yep.
Okay.
I'm sure some questions will arise.
Myth number 4, NAR will raise dues to fund the settlement.
So that's a myth. And my understanding, based on my brief reading, is that we won't be paying NAR dues for 2024 and 2025 is my understanding. Now, I may have that incorrect. If I do, you tell me. But part of that is there was a war chest. NAR did have a substantial savings, which is fortunate for this lawsuit. And, but in order for us not to have to increase dues, they're kind of giving us a break, so to speak. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, they have said that they will not be increasing dues or charging any, assessment fees, for lack of a better term, for 2024 and 2025, because they have been good stewards of our money. So
that's good.
They do have that.
Now, we will have our dues on the local end, though, right? So like the Salt Lake Board of Realtors, I believe we'll still have to pay our annual dues for UAR and all the local associations that we're a part of.
Yep. So, and we should still have our NAR dues. We just won't have an increase. They won't be increasing to fund any of the settlement money.
Okay, good. No. So maybe that's the part I misunderstood. Yeah. Okay.
But we'll see. 2026, that might change, but
yes.
Remains to be seen.
Yeah. So I do have a question for you, and this actually goes back to the previous one. So you guys may have to cut this. I'm sure you'll find. But how do you see commissions going? There's been a lot of concern that, so if you look back in 2009, after the crash of 2008 and Wall Street, there was a concern that after the Dodd-Frank Act, so many loan officers were put out of business, and it did create a lot more competition. Because of all the rules that were put into place. There are agents who are concerned that this will create downward pressure and there will be less agents getting into the business because there will be less compensation. How do you feel about that? Do you think that is the case, or do you feel like for the most part it'll be business as usual?
I think we'll probably see business as usual as far as membership goes. At first, I do think that we will see a shift in membership. Because as people have to start communicating their value up front and getting those agreements signed up front, I do think that will shift some people out of the market. But I also think that there is a healthy amount of realtors, both locally and statewide, currently, and even if that number shifted a little bit, I still think that we would have a healthy balance of people available to the public. We're not going to see membership drop so drastically, in my opinion, that our public is going to be harmed by not having a choice. Yeah. And I think the biggest concern here is just making sure that we're protecting the public and the consumer has options out there, and that they understand, what protects them and the rules and and compensation and all of those things. And so I think we will probably see that shift, but in a healthy way.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, I anticipate probably 15% of our membership will
decrease.
Yeah.
How about commissions as a whole? Do you see commissions going down with this whole change?
That'll be interesting. I don't know if I can speak to that. I feel like our industry has always had the ability to negotiate our compensation. And as a broker and having seen exclusive right to sell agreements for years and years and the different amounts, I really don't feel like we're going to see this huge decrease in what people make. That may not be the case, but I'd like to believe that people that will be able to show their value will be able to negotiate that.
Yep. I actually agree with that too, and that's what I've been telling agents, not because it's just a hope. You know, I've had some agents say, well, do you just hope that that's the case? You know, some agents are very pessimistic in thinking that this will decimate our industry. I think what holds true is that this is still the largest financial decision that someone makes.
Yeah.
And they want a good advisor. They want somebody who's knowledgeable, who will guide them along the way. And research has shown that they're willing to pay for that.
Yeah.
Time and time again. So now it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be consumers who want to save money, but I think overall, you know, you get what you pay for. And when you're dealing with typically someone's largest financial decision, they want an advisor who will guide them through the process, and they're willing to pay for that.
Yeah, so, I agree. Yeah, protect their best interest. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good.
Cool.
All right, let's see what we have.
Now, do you mind if I mention, while you're looking up that next question, do you mind if I mention, because some of the questions that are coming up are just like the practical aspect of like, okay, what do I have to do as far as agency agreements? On the listing end, you're still getting an exclusive right to sell agreement. On the buyer end, you're still getting a buyer broker agreement. One of the biggest changes is compensation offered on the MLS, which is going away.
That is our next myth.
Is that our next myth? Okay, good.
The practice change will do away with offers of compensation to brokers representing buyers.
Okay, so that is a myth because we'll still have compensation to buyers' brokerages. And the difference is that compensation will no longer be shown on the MLS, okay? And in a way, I really, really like this, you know, because you're able to come in with a buyer and, you know, whatever you pre-negotiated on your buyer-broker agreement is what I would imagine most agents will stick to. As they're making their offer, they'll probably say, hey, my buyer-broker agreement shows X amount, and that is what I'm including with this offer.
Yeah.
And then it will be negotiated at the time that the offer is negotiated as well. And if the seller's a stickler on trying to reduce whatever's on that buyer-broker agreement, well, I'm sure they'll push back in a counter offer. And but if the agent is adamant about getting greater compensation, they may push for more compensation. And I'm sure we'll see negotiation where the seller says, well, great, I don't mind paying you more, but it's got to go on top, you know. So, and I think in a way that really helps our industry, because sometimes you see issues where, you know, compensation on what was offered on the MLS differs from what an agent has negotiated on their buyer-broker agreement. And then questions arise from the consumer. Do I get the difference there? I think that all the disclosure up front is one thing that will really resolve any concerns surrounding compensation.
Yeah,
So,
I agree.
Yeah.
You mentioned it no longer being on the MLS. One of the great things I think about the UAR and the forms that they, again, have already been ahead of the industry in is that they created a form that allows buyer broker commissions to be included in the offer. So someone can add that right into the contract and say, hey, here's what I'm asking for. And it's very clear to both the buyer and the seller listing brokerage, buyer's brokerage on what it is that's being requested. And so I think that that's, we'll probably see that form tweaked a little bit, but I like that that is already in place and that people have already been using it. It probably gives them a little bit of a advantage being aware of that.
And I think that's kind of been a natural evolution. You know, as do I, as brokers, we'll see contracts. We've seen contracts over the years where agents have included their compensation in an addendum.
Yeah.
And in the past, we've always come back and said, that's a big no-no. You can't do that. Commissions are between brokerages, negotiated between brokerages. You can't put it in the REPC. But now we have this incorporated as part of the process, which I think was kind of a natural evolution of the process.
Yeah,
so,
I agree.
Yeah.
One of the things that that NAR fought really hard for is the ability for a seller to still say, when they believe that value is there, hey, I'm going to offer, for example, $10,000 of closing costs up front. You have permission to, advertise that on the MLS listing. And it sounds like they fought back a little bit, the DOJ, and said, that's fine, as long as in no way, it's referenced that it's for a buyer broker commission.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that? How do you think people will navigate that when it comes to the MLS?
Well, I'm not sure if I fully follow your question.
How do you think people will? Do you think it will be something that is easy for people to work that out with their seller when they take the listing and then share the information on the MLS? And do you think people will kind of find a way to navigate the information in a way that we have to kind of police ourselves? I wonder if you think it'll be a natural thing for that to just become the standard, is that a seller will offer it, it'll be put in place, or if they're still going to have to try and negotiate it through the contract.
That's a great question. Yeah. I think time will tell. What my gut tells me is that when we go to take a listing, I think we're still going to try to convince the seller, hey, if you really want to sell this property, you're going to have to offer a buyer's brokerage compensation. Yeah. So I think that's what my gut tells me. I feel like that's the direction it's going to go. Because one of the fears that's come out of this lawsuit is, oh my goodness, buyer brokerage compensation, that's going out the door. I just don't think that's the case. And I think that stems from the fact that this is one of the largest financial decisions that someone will make. On the buying end, they want somebody who can guide them through the process, and they're willing to pay for that. Now, do I think that some sellers are going to push back and say, I'm only willing to compensate you, Stephanie, as my listing agent. I'm not going to offer any compensation. We're going to wait until they come and, ask for compensation. I still feel like you as a listing agent, you disagree with me if you want to, but I think you would still say, I'm sorry, but if you really want to sell this property, you should be offering a buyer's compensation, a buyer's brokerage compensation. And I think that will probably still be the norm. That's my thought on it. Now, one discussion that has come up, or that I've heard from time and time again, what happens in scenarios where you get brokerages who are just doing this for a flat fee? Are those going to pop up? They already exist. Yeah. The question is, are they going to become more popular? Maybe. Who knows? We'll see. I feel like they have their place. I think the average agent has their place. Those who are trying to save money, I think they'll go ahead and find a discount brokerage to list their property. Yeah. Now, as far as buyer compensation is concerned, if the seller is in no way, no how is willing to offer a buyer's compensation, a buyer brokerage compensation, the question that's come up is, can it now be financed? Can compensation be financed? Yeah. And it sounds like lenders may go in that direction. Yeah. So now that may still, I could see buyers getting bugged by that. Yeah. Oh, I have representation, but in order to pay this person their 3%, I now have to tack that on to my mortgage. Yeah. It's nice that that may now be an option, because I think that may resolve those scenarios where you have discount brokerages
Yeah.
who the seller is unwilling to pay any form of buyer's compensation and the buyer can't come out of pocket for it.
Yeah.
Then having that as an option to be able to, build it into the loan, I think will help our industry.
Yeah.
So,
I agree.
but my own personal opinion is I think it will probably still be business as usual. I think as we go take listings, I think we're going to strongly recommend, hey, you want to get this sold. Most buyers, more than 85% of buyers are represented. If you want to get this sold, you're going to need to offer a buyer's compensation.
I agree. And I think most seasoned sellers would agree with that. I think that they would understand that on the other side that they would want that as well. So
Yeah.
I agree. I think it'll be a little business as usual.
I don't know if that answered your question.
It did. I asked it weird. So
Yeah. No, you're okay. That's perfect.
fabulous.
I
We
think
only
we're
have
almost
one
done,
more.
right? Yeah, we're
Myth
almost
number
done.
7, NAR settled because the plaintiff's allegations are true.
No. And I think this goes back to the beginning of our discussion about how ludicrous this lawsuit really is. And I can't imagine I'd get in trouble for saying that, but obviously people hold personal opinions, and that's my personal opinion. And my thought is, if the real estate industry is being hit because of the way it did its compensation, this really opens the door to every industry out there being hit for a class action lawsuit. Who's to stop class action attorneys from going after every industry,
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this really a frustrating subject for a lot of agents, is because they really ask what harm was done. Really, what harm was done? Even those sellers in Missouri who complained that they didn't know they were paying a buyer's agent, well, they certainly did know. They signed off on it at the time of closing.
Yeah.
You can't tell me that they did not know,
Yeah. They still know what they're paying up front, regardless of who it went to.
Yeah. I mean, contrast that to a pharmaceutical company who produces a drug. If they had had their patients sign off saying this will cause long-term damage, and the patient, I think it would have reduced the liability. It's just, it's different. It's a different way of looking at class action than we've ever seen before.
Yeah. I
And
agree.
I'm not a huge fan of class action suits. I think there is a place for it, especially where true harm has been done.
Yeah.
But it's weird to see it being applied to a services industry, I agree. I think that is a myth. I think that all of us agents, I think even NAR would say, we don't feel like any wrong has been done. I think it's just natural in the world, in the legal world, to settle. That's the direction that most attorneys want to go.
Yeah.
We don't want this going to court. We want to settle.
Yeah. And that's exactly what they said. We've agreed, and it's stated in writing, that we deny all wrongdoing, but this is the best, recourse that we have for our members so that we can move forward and find a way for us to continue to protect the consumer and show up as an industry. So,
Yes.
well, awesome. Thanks,
Cool.
Dave. Thanks
Stephanie,
for
what an
answering all the
honor
questions.
to be interviewed and to interview. It's just an open discussion. So
I love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.